It was 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve when my daughter, Beatrice, showed up at my door, bloodied, bruised, and broken. But it wasn't just the marks on her skin that hit me hardest. It was the way she looked at me. She was crushed. "He did again, Dad," she whispered through tears, shaking in the cold night air. He had her in our bed, and then he hit me." I didn't need to hear more. I knew. I'd seen the signs for years, brushed them off, thinking it wasn't my fight. I should have seen it. I muttered, pacing the living room, my hands shaking as I clenched them into fists. The years of being a cop had taught me how to ignore the pain, how to shut off the voice that screamed in my head. But this was my daughter. And when she came to me, broken and defeated, that old cop instinct kicked in hard. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Finesse was a coward, hiding behind his charm, his smile. I should have done something back then when I saw the way he controlled her, but I didn't. I thought I was protecting her by keeping the peace. But now he had crossed a line. And that's when it hit me. He didn't just hurt her. He crossed the line with me, too. He had no idea what he had started. He couldn't possibly know that when he hurt her, he was signing his own fate. I was done playing nice. It was time to remind him just who he was dealing with. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to learn that a man like me, the kind who'd live his life serving justice, didn't just let things slide. Not anymore. And that night would be the beginning of his end. I stood there, staring at Beatrice, her face pale, tears still streaking down her cheeks. The years of pretending everything was fine, of convincing myself I was doing my best by staying out of her mess. Those days were over. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. I had spent my whole life as a cop, fighting crime, solving problems, keeping the peace. But here I was in my own home, watching my daughter's life unravel because of a man who didn't even deserve her. And it made my blood boil. I should have done something sooner, I muttered under my breath, pacing in tight circles. I had ignored the signs for too long. All the little moments I brushed off like they were nothing. The controlling comments, the isolation. Hell, even the first time I saw Finesse raise his hand to her at the wedding. Those were the moments I should have acted. But I let it slide, thinking she'd figure it out. I was wrong. Beatrice sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I can't go back to him, Dad," she whispered. He's everything I thought I wanted, but now I don't even know who he is anymore." I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence hang in the air, heavy and thick. I had been a father, a cop, a man of action, but never before had I felt so powerless. Then, like a snap, I remembered the one thing I could do. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. The uniform, the badge, everything I had worked for, everything I had been, could still count for something. The old detective in me was still alive, and I knew what I had to do. "I'm going to fix this," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "I'll make sure he never touches you again." The thought of walking into Finesse's house, taking him down, felt right. I had the experience. I had the knowledge. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he could break my daughter, but he was about to learn something. When a man like me gets involved, things don't just get fixed, they get destroyed. And I was ready to take down the monster who thought he could get away with everything, ready to show him what happens when you mess with my family. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Beatrice, trembling in my doorway, the marks on her face, the tears that wouldn't stop falling. It made me sick. By morning, the decision had already been made. There was no going back now. I grabbed my old police uniform from the closet, the fabric worn and faded, but still carrying the weight of everything I had stood for. It had been years since I wore it, but something about slipping it on again felt right. It felt like I was becoming the man I used to be, the man who took control, who made things right. I wasn't just her father anymore. I was her protector, and Finesse didn't stand a chance. I called Orville, my old partner from back in the day. He'd been retired almost as long as I had, but there was nobody else I trusted more when it came to getting things done. "We need to move fast," I said. I've got enough to bring him in. We're going to hit him where it hurts. Orville didn't hesitate. I'm in, he said. He was the kind of guy who never asked questions, who never second-guessed. If I said it needed to be done, he was there. Then I called Norbert, another guy from my old precinct. He wasn't part of the crew I work with, but he owed me a few favors, and I knew he'd come through. Meet me at 8 a.m. sharp, I told him. We're going to pay Finesse a visit. I didn't tell them everything. Didn't need to. They knew what Finesse was capable of. They knew what kind of man he was. And they trusted me enough to know that whatever happened next, it would be for a reason. As the sun started to rise, I stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the same guy I'd been a year ago. Hell, he wasn't even the same guy from yesterday. Today, I was someone else, a man who had a purpose. Finesse wouldn't know what hit him. As I stepped out the door, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore. This was about making sure that no one would ever think they could get away with hurting the people I loved. We were going in, and there was no turning back. The drive to Finesse's place felt like it took forever. The closer we got, the more the weight of what I was about to do settled in. I kept replaying everything in my head. Beatrice's broken voice, the look in her eyes. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. When we pulled up to his house, the neighborhood was quiet, like any other suburban street, all wrapped up in the soft, comforting hum of Christmas lights and early morning stillness. But behind those closed doors, Finesse's world was anything but peaceful. Inside that house, he was a monster. And today, we were going to rip the mask off. I could see Orville's face in the rearview mirror. No words needed to be said. He was ready. Norbert, who had shown up just minutes before, stood by the car, his expression grim. We all knew what had to be done. This was the point of no return. The plan was simple. Hit hard, hit fast. We'd arrest him, get the evidence we needed, and make sure he couldn't hurt anyone again. No delays. No mercy. I walked up to the door, my heart beating like a drum in my chest, and knocked. A few seconds later, Finesse answered, his smile fading the moment he saw me standing there. That same cocky look he always had, that charm he wore like armor, wasn't going to save him now. I didn't even give him a chance to speak. Finesse, I said coldly, pushing past him into the house. You're under arrest for assault. He froze. The arrogance was still there, but it wavered just a crack. What the hell is this? He spat, taking a step back. Before he could do anything else, Orville and Norbert were right behind me, moving in fast, securing the area. Finesse didn't even try to fight. I guess he thought I was bluffing. But as we cuffed him, the truth started sinking in. He had no idea how deep he was in. He was done. We took him to the living room, and that's when the real mess started to unravel. The evidence was all over the place. Broken furniture, ripped clothing. And then, there she was, Zelda, his other woman, sitting in the corner, wide-eyed and scared. She didn't say anything at first, just stare at me, but when I asked her to step up, she spoke. I'll testify, she said, her voice shaking. He did this. He hurt her, and I helped him cover it up. Finesse's face turned pale. He hadn't counted on this. He hadn't counted on the truth coming out from all sides. And it wasn't over yet. As I looked at him, cuffed and defeated, I couldn't help but think, this is only the beginning. It wasn't just a law that was coming for him now. It was justice, and it was personal. The air inside Finesse's house felt thick with tension as we hauled him down to the station. He was quieter now, his usual bravado shattered. But there was something else in his eyes, fear. He hadn't seen this coming. He hadn't realized how far I was willing to go. We didn't waste time. Orville and Norbert had him locked up in a holding cell while I started gathering evidence. The photos, the medical records, Beatrice's testimony. It was all lining up, the kind of proof that couldn't be ignored. Finesse thought he could get away with it, but now he was facing something bigger than his lies. I stood in the small room where we were going over everything, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. This wasn't just about the law anymore. This was about sending a message, about making sure Finesse never thought he could control anyone again, especially not my daughter. I looked at the stack of photos on the table. It was hard to look at them. The bruises on Beatrice's arms, the terror in her eyes. It was like I could feel her pain all over again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had me. She had us. I walked over to the evidence board, my finger tracing the photos of Finesse and Zelda. Both of them were going down. Zelda had her role to play in all this. She had helped him. She'd covered up for him. But Finesse was the real mastermind. He was the one who needed to pay for everything. Orville came into the room and slapped a folder down on the table. "He's in there, talking a big game," he said, nodding toward the holding cell. "But he knows he's done. We've got him." I nodded, feeling that familiar sense of purpose settle in. It was time to finish this. But as I turned to walk out, my phone buzzed. It was Beatrice. I picked it up quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I don't know if I can do this." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through with the trial. I'm scared." I paused, leaning against the doorframe. For a second, I could hear the pain in her voice, and it made my heart ache. But I wasn't about to let her back down now. "You're stronger than you think," I said, my voice calm. "We're going to get him, Beatrice. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of us." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment, but then I heard her take a deep breath. "Okay, Dad, I'll do it." I hung up the phone, feeling a surge of pride. She was ready. She had finally found her strength. And Finesse? He was about to lose everything. Everything. The next few days were a blur. Everything was moving fast. Too fast. But I couldn't afford to let my focus slip. We had Finesse in custody. But that was only the beginning. The real battle was going to play out in the courtroom, and that was where I needed to be sharp. I met with Beatrice and her lawyer to go over her testimony. The nerves were clear on her face, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't the same woman who had come to my door, broken and afraid. She was stronger, standing taller. It made me proud, and it made me even more determined to see this through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Finesse was going to try something. He had always been slippery, a man who knew how to twist situations to his advantage. He wasn't going down quietly. I kept my ear to the ground, tried to get a sense of his next move. Orville was working his contacts, and Norbert was pulling strings at the precinct, trying to make sure Finesse didn't get any funny ideas. But there was something else weighing on my mind, something I couldn't ignore. I had a visit to make. The night before the trial, I went to the local bar where I knew Zelda hung out. It wasn't the kind of place I usually frequented, but I wasn't there for a drink. I was there for answers, and maybe a little pressure. When I walked in, she was sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing a drink, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew better. She had a lot to lose, and I was about to make sure she knew that. I pulled up a chair next to her and waited for her to notice me. "Zelda," I said, my voice low but firm. She didn't turn right away, but eventually she glanced up, her eyes narrowing when she saw who I was. "What do you want, old man?" she snapped. I leaned in, getting as close as I could without crossing any lines. "I want you to think very carefully about the choices you've made. You're not just some side piece anymore, Zelda. You're a witness. And your testimony, your words, are going to make all the difference." Her hand shook slightly as she took another sip of her drink, her eyes darting around the room. She didn't want to get involved, but she already was. "What if I don't want to testify?" she said quietly. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you'll be complicit. And trust me, that's a road you don't want to go down." She flinched, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "You can't just threaten me," she muttered, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. She knew I wasn't playing games. I stood up, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You can help him, help Finesse, and walk away with nothing. Or you can help my daughter and make sure he never hurts anyone again." She was silent for a moment, and I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I'll testify," she said, finally looking me in the eyes. I nodded. "Good choice." As I left the bar, I felt a small sense of satisfaction, but I knew it wasn't over yet. We still had the trial ahead, and there was no telling how Finesse was going to fight back. But one thing was clear now. Zelda was on our side, and that was the last piece we needed. The day of the trial arrived faster than I was ready for. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost suffocating. Everything we had fought for, everything we'd worked toward, was about to be laid bare in front of everyone. Beatrice was a wreck, but I could see the fire in her eyes. She had come so far, fought so hard to get to this point, but today would be the ultimate test, and I knew she was scared. Hell, I was scared too, but we had no choice. We couldn't back down now. I watched as she paced in the courtroom, her lawyer by her side, going over her testimony one last time. Her hands shook, but her resolve was stronger than anything I'd ever seen. She was ready, and as her father, I wasn't going to let her face this alone. I could already feel my blood boiling at the thought of Finesse, sitting there, smirking, thinking he could weasel his way out of this. But he wasn't going to. Not today. The judge called the court into session, and the room went quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. I took my seat in the back, a constant reminder of the man who had been waiting for this moment, the man who had been silenced for so long, the man who was now ready to strike. Finesse sat across the room, his posture still perfect, his suit sharp, like he was above all of this. But there was a crack in his confidence now. He knew the game was up. His lawyer stood up first, delivering the opening statement with the usual polished confidence. It was all lies, of course. He tried to paint Finesse as a misunderstood man, just a husband struggling to keep his marriage together. But we all knew the truth. Beatrice was called to the stand first. She stepped up, her knees trembling slightly, but there was a new strength in her voice. She told her story, every painful detail, the control, the isolation, the bruises, the fear. And when she spoke about that night, the night she found Finesse in bed with Zelda, it hit me like a freight train. I could see the hurt in her eyes. I could feel her pain. But what surprised me was the way she held herself. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't begging for sympathy. She was telling the truth. And the truth? It had power. Finesse's lawyer tried to tear into her, tried to discredit her, but it didn't work. Every time he attacked, she only grew stronger. She stood her ground, unshaken. And that was the moment I knew we had won. Then, as if on cue, Zelda took the stand. I wasn't sure how she would play it. After all, she had everything to lose too. But when she began to speak, I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret. She wasn't proud of what she'd done. Zelda's testimony was raw and honest. She confirmed everything, every bruise, every lie Finesse had told. She didn't hold back. She knew the consequences of her actions now. The courtroom went silent as she looked directly at Finesse. "I'm sorry," she said, almost whispering, "but I can't cover for you anymore." Finesse's face turned ashen. The smirk was gone, replaced with something darker, a man realizing he was out of options, out of lies. The defense tried to salvage what was left of his case, but it was clear the tide had turned. There was no escaping the truth. I watched him, that man who had destroyed my daughter's life, sitting there broken, as the weight of his actions finally sank in. This was it. This was the end of his game. And as the judge called for a recess, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. It wasn't over yet, but we were getting close. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the trial dragged on. It felt like time had slowed down, each minute stretching into eternity. But we were winning. I could feel it in my gut. The momentum was on our side. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every word out of Beatrice's mouth was building towards something unstoppable. I kept glancing at Finesse. He had gone from cocky to defensive to downright desperate. It was like watching a man slowly drowning and trying to pretend he was still in control. The smug look he once wore had vanished, replaced by a mix of anger and fear. The walls were closing in on him, and he knew it. Beatrice was holding up, but I could see the strain on her face. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but she wasn't backing down. She had made it this far, and now there was no turning back. I was proud of her. I had seen her at her lowest, and now I was watching her fight with everything she had. When it was finally Finessa's turn to take the stand, I could feel the room shift. The energy in the courtroom changed. It was his turn to face the music. He took his place, his jaw clenched tight, eyes flicking nervously around the room. His lawyer tried to smooth things over, but the damage had already been done. Every attempt to shift blame onto Beatrice fell flat. There was no escaping the truth anymore. And then came the moment that sealed it all. The moment Finesse made the mistake he couldn't take back. "I didn't do it," he said, his voice shaking with fake confidence. "She's lying. She wanted this. She was always looking for a way out." The room went silent. Beatrice stood up from her seat, her voice low but steady. "You're lying, Finesse. I'm not the one who's been hiding. I'm not the one who's been afraid to face the truth." Finesse's face went white. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. There was nothing left to argue. The judge called for a break, but I knew the case was practically over. Finesse had sealed his fate. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was different. The defense had nothing left to throw at us. Finesse's lies had unraveled completely. It was clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't just about a broken marriage or a twisted affair. This was about control, manipulation, and violence. And Finesse had been exposed to the coward he was. Beatrice was sitting next to me now, her hand clenched tight in mine. I could feel her pulse under my skin, steady and strong. She was tired, worn out from days of reliving the worst moments of her life, but she had a fire in her that refused to die out. She was finally taking back her life. The prosecutor stood up, giving his closing arguments. His words cut through the air like a blade, every point sharp and precise. He talked about Finesse's pattern of abuse, the emotional and physical scars he left on Beatrice, and how he thought he could get away with it all. But now there was no escaping. I watched Finesse closely as the prosecutor spoke. His face twisted, his eyes darting around the room, but there was nothing left to say. He was broken, his confidence, his charm, his arrogance gone. And now, he was just a man desperate to avoid the inevitable. The prosecutor finished, and the judge called for a brief recess before the final verdict. Beatrice and I stood up, walking out of the courtroom together. We didn't speak much, but there was a quiet understanding between us. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. As we walked down the hall, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. It was almost over. We'd fought through the worst of it, and now, we were about to see the justice we deserved. Back in the courtroom, the jury filed in. The room went silent. My heart pounded in my chest as the judge asked for the verdict. And then it came, guilty. Finesse's face went pale. His shoulders slumped. He couldn't believe it, but it didn't matter. The truth had been heard, and there was no hiding from it anymore. As the judge banged his gavel, I looked at Beatrice. She was shaking, but her smile said everything. We had won. The guilty verdict hit, like a wave crashing onto the shore. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Finesse sitting there in disbelief, the jury filing out, the murmur of the courtroom buzzing like a distant hum in my ears. It was over. But even as the judge read out the consequences, 2 years probation, anger management classes, a fine, I could see the real toll it was taking on him. He wasn't even looking at Beatrice anymore. He couldn't. The man who thought he was untouchable, the one who thought he could break my daughter and get away with it, was now nothing more than a convicted criminal. As the judge's words rang out, I couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction. This was what justice looked like. Beatrice stood up, her legs shaking, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't the scared woman who had walked into this place weeks ago. No, this Beatrice was stronger. She was free. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she held her head high, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. We walked out of the courtroom together, and I could tell she was struggling to keep it together, but I was proud of her. We had done this together. And now, Finesse was getting what he deserved. Outside, the sun was shining bright, the Christmas decorations still up, bright lights flickering in the distance. It should have felt like a peaceful day, but for me, it felt like the first day of the rest of Beatrice's life. She was free. We didn't say much as we got into the car, but I could feel the sense of finality between us. This was the end of the road, the end of the fight, but also the beginning of something new, something better. As I drove, I looked at Beatrice out of the corner of my eye. Her face was soft, her eyes still tired, but there was a new peace in her. The journey hadn't been easy, but this was the moment we both had been waiting for, the moment we had taken back control. "We're okay, Dad," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "We're really okay." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed her. It felt strange, almost surreal, to drive away from the courthouse with Beatrice beside me. We had spent so many days in that place, listening to the lies, the accusations, the pain. But now it was done. The weight of it all seemed to lift just a little more with every mile we put between us and finesse. Beatrice sat quietly, looking out the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tapping on the door handle. It wasn't a sadness that hung in the air. No, it was something more like reflection, like she was processing everything that had happened. The woman who had walked into the courtroom was different than the one I had raised. She was stronger. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she spoke, even in the way she just sat there, taking it all in. It was late afternoon by the time we got to her house, and the place was decorated for Christmas. Soft lights twinkling in the windows, a wreath on the door. It was beautiful, but there was an emptiness, too, a quiet that seemed to hang over everything, like we were still waiting for something. "You okay?" I asked as we stepped out of the car, my voice low, cautious. Beatrice paused and nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's hard to believe it's over. You know," she hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I spent so long in fear, Dad. I forgot what it was like to breathe, to just live." I couldn't answer right away. The lump in my throat was too thick, the emotion too raw. I'd watched her suffer. I'd let her suffer. And now, for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the woman she was always meant to be, the woman I hadn't been able to protect before. But now she was free. As we walked inside, Beatrice paused by the tree, her fingers tracing the ornaments as if the simple act of touching them grounded her. "I'm going to be okay, Dad," she said again, almost as if reassuring herself. I didn't need to say anything more. I could see it. It was in the way she held herself now, the way she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter as someone who had found her strength again, who had taken control of her own life. And as I stood there, watching her look around the house, I knew one thing for sure. Finesse was the last thing on her mind. This was her future. The past? It was behind her. And so was I. I smiled softly. "Yeah, you are." She turned to me, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." "No," I said, the words catching my throat. "Thank you." And for the first time in a long while, the future felt bright again. Christmas Eve rolled around, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like home. It was strange, quiet, but warm. The usual rush of chaos had given way to peace. The tree lights flickered softly in the corner, casting a gentle glow across the room. I could smell the faint scent of pine, mixed with something sweet, baking in the kitchen. Beatrice was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the first time in years. There was a small smile on her face as she moved around, her hands working with a calm, deliberate rhythm. She looked happy. More than that, she looked whole. I stood by the window, watching the snow gently fall outside. It felt surreal, this quiet evening after everything we'd been through. The last few months had been a whirlwind, pain, fear, confusion, but now it was like we'd stepped into a different life. One where Beatrice was no longer defined by her past, where she could actually breathe. "Dinner's almost ready," she called, her voice full of light. "You can help by setting the table, Dad." I chuckled. "You're bossing me around now, huh?" But it felt good. For the first time, I wasn't worried about how to fix things, about how to keep her safe. She was already safe. And maybe I was, too. I set the table in silence, the weight of the day settling into my bones. Everything we had worked for, everything I had fought for, had brought us to this moment. This was the reward. Beatrice came in, a plate of food in her hands, and we sat down to eat, just the two of us. There was no awkwardness, no tension between us anymore. We ate slowly, the sound of forks scraping against plates the only noise in the room. It was a good silence, a comfortable one. As we finished, Beatrice leaned back in her chair, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It was soft, but something more. "You know," she said, her voice almost too quiet to hear, "I never really realized how much you've always had my back. I've spent so much time hating myself, I never saw how much you love me." I met her eyes, surprised by the raw honesty in her words. It had been a long time since we'd talked like this. But in this moment, it was all that mattered. "I'll always have your back, Beatrice," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Always." We sat in silence for a long time, just looking at each other. No more words needed. The past was behind us, and the future? It was wide open. And as I glanced out the window, watching the snow settle into the night, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The days after Christmas were a blur of small victories, getting back to work, setting up new routines, and watching Beatrice settle into the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. The house was still full of Christmas cheer, but there was something more now, a sense of renewal. For the first time in years, it felt like we were both breathing freely. Vanessa's shadow no longer loomed over us. He was still facing his consequences, but that was no longer our problem. It was his mess to clean up. I spent the next few days sorting through old papers, checking off a list of things I'd neglected. The house needed a bit of tidying, but it wasn't just the physical clutter that I was sorting through. It was emotional baggage, too. I found the old box of Beatrice's childhood drawings, the one she used to give me for Father's Day, and for a brief moment, I was flooded with memories. Her laugh, her first bike ride, the way she'd always wanted to be a detective just like me. "Dad, I'm going to head out for a while," Beatrice called from the hallway. I turned, surprised by the sudden change in plans. "Where you going?" I asked, a little concerned. She smiled. "Just out for a walk. I need to clear my head." I didn't stop her. It was a good sign, really. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was moving forward, taking control of her own path. It wasn't long before she was back, and when she entered, there was something different about her, a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to start fresh," she said, setting her bag down by the door. "Not just with my job or where I live, but with everything." I didn't have to ask what she meant. She was healing, truly healing, and it made me realize how far we had both come. We sat together that night, watching the fire flicker in the fireplace. There was no need for words. We had already said everything that needed to be said. For the first time in a long while, the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that said everything was okay. And that was enough. Everything was okay. The new year arrived quietly. No big celebrations, no loud parties, just the two of us, sitting in the living room, watching the ball drop on TV. The world outside was filled with fireworks, but inside, it was calm. There was something comforting about the stillness. Beatrice was different now. She was still the same person, but stronger, more sure of herself. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the way she handled her work, even how she interacted with the kids. She was becoming the woman I always knew she could be, confident, resilient, and most importantly, at peace. The peace she deserved. It was a cold January evening when Beatrice brought up something unexpected. We had been talking about the future, about the things we wanted to do, the places we wanted to go, and then she stopped, looking at me with a strange, almost hesitant expression. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been looking into therapy for myself, for the things I haven't dealt with." I wasn't surprised, but hearing her say out loud hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. She had taken so much on her own shoulders. For years, she had carried the weight of what Vanessa had done to her, of the silence, the fear. And now, she was ready to let it go. I nodded slowly. "That's a good idea, Beatrice. I think it's time." She smiled a soft, knowing smile. Yeah, I think it is. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She was taking control of her healing. There was something about that moment that felt like the final step in the long journey we had both been on. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything we had been through. The pain, the fear, the anger, it was all behind us now. And now it was just us. No more shadows. No more secrets. It was a new beginning. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something else. I had spent so many years trying to protect Beatrice from the world, trying to shield her from harm. But what I hadn't realized was that she had always been stronger than I gave her credit for. She didn't need me to protect her anymore. She had learned to protect herself. And that was the greatest victory of all. The months that followed felt like a quiet kind of rebirth. Beatrice kept up with her therapy, and I could see the difference. Her confidence was growing by the day, and she was beginning to open up more, not just to me, but to herself. She was letting go of the past in ways I hadn't thought possible. But the most surprising thing was watching her rebuild her relationships. With the kids, she was becoming the mother they'd always deserved, not the broken version she had been. And with me, we were finally back to a place of mutual respect. There were no more awkward silences, no more lingering guilt hanging over us. We had made it through the worst. Together, one afternoon, Beatrice called me out of the blue. "Dad, I've been thinking about the house, the one we grew up in. What if we sold it?" The question caught me off guard. That house had been a symbol of so many things. Our life together, the years of struggle, and the memories of what we'd been through. It had been the place where Beatrice had grown up, where she'd endured so much. The idea of leaving it behind felt like closing a chapter one wasn't ready to finish. But then, I thought about it for a moment. Maybe it was time. The house had become a reminder of the past, a reminder of all the hurt. Maybe it was time to let go, to find a new place for both of us, a place that wasn't tainted by the old memories. "You know what?" I said slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to let go and start fresh." She smiled a small but genuine smile, and I could see the relief in her eyes. We were finally at a point where we could let go. Later that week, we started the process of selling the house. It wasn't easy, but every step felt like progress. It wasn't just about moving to a new place. It was about moving on. Beatrice and I spent the next few weeks packing up the memories, the photos, the little things that had been part of our lives for so long. And with every box we filled, it felt like we were both getting lighter. When we finally locked the door for the last time, it wasn't sadness I felt. It was freedom. And as I turned to Beatrice, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a new one, and we were both ready for it. Christmas Eve, 1 year later. The snow fell steady outside, the house glowing with warm light, laughter spilling through every room. Beatrice's home was alive again, ornaments twinkling on the tree, stockings hung neatly over the fireplace, and the smell of roasted turkey drifting in from the kitchen. The kids darted around with excitement, their voices ringing like bells. It was the kind of night that felt like a second chance. I sat in my chair by the window, watching it all unfold. A year ago, she had arrived at my door broken and afraid. Tonight, she was radiant, head held high, smile easy and free. She had built this life from the ashes, brick by brick, and now it stood stronger than ever. This was her victory. But the true moment came when the phone rang. Beatrice picked it up, her face calm as she listened. I could hear the voice on the other end. It was Finesse, trying one last time to claw back what he'd lost. Begging, pleading, but there was no tremor in her voice this time. Just clarity. "No, Finesse," she said, firm and steady. "You don't control me anymore. I'm done." She hung up, walked back to the table, and sat down beside her children as if nothing had happened. The power he once held was gone, snuffed out in a single decisive moment. He had lost. She had won. I raised my glass, catching her eye across the table. She smiled at me, a smile full of gratitude and strength. And in that instant, I knew my role was complete. I had done what I set out to do. I had kept my promise. As the clock struck midnight, the bells outside rang clear, echoing through the night. It was over. Justice had been served. Not in the courtroom, not in the verdict, but here in this home with love stronger than fear. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. The story of revenge was finished. The story of rebirth had just begun. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.